G'day everyone, welcome to this edition of DURKO's Notebook for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. We've really got a shitload to talk about for this edition, especially behind the scenes stuff, not just the race action. So anyway, pull up a pew, sit back, relax and enjoy the show.
You wouldn't fucking read about it.
So for the third time, effectively the F1 circus, as it's now called, has returned to the Jeddah Kanish street circuit in Saudi Arabia. It's on the coast of the Red Sea, and it's 6.174 kilometres with 27 turns. It's in terms of its challenge, it's really more challenging in terms of the speed at which the cars get, because it is effectively shaped like a hairpin. But with that saying, it does offer some challenges in terms of there's basically bugger all real estate for them to go off with if they're going to have an incident. So one of the highlights was, obviously, it was a bit of a setback to show the reliability of the RBR19, but Max was put into P15 in quali because he busted the drive shaft on his tub, and that clearly gave him the shits as a result of the evidently the way he drove during the race, of course. Now, the first talking point I want to get around, and this is something we're basically going to highlight the FIA through most of this notebook. Lance Stroll's gone off. He's obviously cooked his front brakes. His engineer's got on the radio, on the horn, said, "Well, Lance, you've got to pull the car over, stop," which he did at a corner. He's managed to, under the weight of the car, obviously an angel gear, driven it in behind the concrete safety barrier to where the JCB was parked, and you can see that JCB was probably not the most inconvenient spot, but they have to deploy when they got to deploy, so that's where it was parked. That aside, where Lance ended up parking his car, as you can see from this photo, somehow some stupid GPS positioning data has been relayed to the FIA to say that the rear wing of the car was still deemed to be effectively on the circuit. So how that works out, I don't know, but clearly the FIA have got to sort something out with their triggering of alarms for where the position of the car is. Now, I've been fortunate enough to be into the FIA control room at the Melbourne Grand Prix over the previous couple of years, prior to the race, of course, and not during it. But there's a ton of blokes sitting in there, and women, controlling this array of screens, like going to the NASA Launch Centre. And you just look at these array of screens, there's computers, there's the blue desk that the FIA officials sit at, that's what they control it from. But for them to work out this GPS position, the car's not on the track. I mean, you can get a TV screen in front of you, live shot saying, yep, Lees is off the road, it's all good, we're right to go. But because of this GPS positioning, it triggered the safety car, brought Bert Mainlander out, he's driven around for about half a dozen laps and just completely stuffed everything. So the FIA have got to get that shit sorted, because that is just pathetic. In the modern day of electronics, they can't work out from a live TV screen feed that the car's off the track is just beyond me. The second thing I want to talk about, and this has caused a shitload of controversy and discussion. Now, Nando obviously got a 5-second penalty for not positioning himself correctly within his grid box. Yep, he's a double world champion. He's been around. He's driven for just about every team that's ever raced in F1 since he started. Was it a driver error? Yes, it was. Did he take it on the chin? Yep, he wasn't fazed by it. But then it came to the reaction of either his front or his rear jackman to say that they had touched the car when the 5-second penalty was implemented when he came to do his pit stop. They've obviously defended that. They've gone to their right of reply to argue the penalty. And to the credit of AMR, they've said, look, here's 7 videos of where it's previously occurred and no additional penalty was handed out to what was already the substantive offence. So the FIA have got to really tighten up the rule book and the penalties that are allocated, or what they hand out, because it's just bullshit that you get to the end of the race. No, it's now gone to 10 seconds because the mechanic touched the car. George Russell gets parachuted into third for about an hour or so, or a couple of hours, and a couple of hours later they turn up and say, George, sorry, we've got a receipt here, we need that trophy back, it's got to go back to Nando. It just brings the sport in disrepute, and it just makes us look like an absolute pack of clowns that are running the show. So it's just pathetic that the way they're doing it. Now, this highlights a couple of great comments I picked up on. Chris Perrin said, Why don't they close the pit lane for the first lap under a safety car? Good point, Chris. I say, hypothetically, and I say this hypothetically, and they could try it at one race to try it, because they're going to try this new other position system they're doing later this year. What would be the problem with closing the pit altogether under a safety car? So the car's got to stay out in their formation. There's no confusion then over who's gaining an advantage to pit under a safety car. And then it makes it harder work for the strategists as part of the team to be able to work out whether their team or their car is going to go once the pit's open again. Just a thought. So then Darren Fellows came up with the idea, if Nando was to come in and serve his 5-second penalty, why not have a dedicated FIA pit box? Now, obviously during free practice and quali, sometimes they do it. They get the witches' hats out at the beginning of the pit before the first team's garage, mark the witches' hats out, get half a dozen, then one for what would be the mechanic with the front jack. The car comes in, that's where they sometimes put on the scales, or Joe Bauer as the paddock policeman stands there and goes over the car with a technical eye. They could stand there with a bloke with a stopwatch. They get a bloke with a piece of string on the end of the witch's hat. As soon as your 5 seconds done, they yank the witch's hat out of the way. The driver says it might go. There's no reason why they couldn't employ a couple of people to stand there in FI white shirts and blue pants with a stopwatch and say, righto, this is your penalty grid box. If you need to service your car, you can then go up to your team, come in, do your normal pit stop. Removes that discrepancy of the jack accidentally being put against the car, or a wheel gun guy accidentally trying to undo the nut to just totally stuff it, as we saw what happened with Ocon in Bahrain, and then obviously Nando last night. So that's just a thought. I've got to say, Darren Fellows, full credit to your theory of the FI pit box. I think they've just got to do it. Because it completely keeps it neutral. Then if anyone wants to say the FIA biased, you can say whatever, but you can have a live camera standing there with the FIA blokes doing the 5-second penalty. Right, you're out of jail, go, keep racing. Now, I'm going to pose this as a question. It's just a thought I had during the race. Has George Russell got into Lewis Hamilton's head? It might be the fact that Angela Cullen has parted ways amicably with Lewis as his trainer. She's gone off to do whatever she wants to do now after 7 years. But I'm starting to think, has George really got into his head that I can outdrive you in this W14? Because that was witnessed last night. And from what I've read on a few overseas newspapers, Lewis has got the shits with the decision George made to set the way he set his car up, and Lewis obviously went the other way, which may have been a complete, stuff up from Lewis. But it is what it is. But I'm just wondering if George, as the new kid in the team, has just got a better feeling for the W14, or as I said, has he just got into Lewis's head? The next thing I want to say is I would like to have been in the back of the garage or the motorhome or wherever they were doing it in Zach's office. The McLaren debrief post-race between obviously Lando and Oscar, because Lando was in no uncertain terms told to pull aside to let Oscar through because he was quicker than him, and I don't think that's going to sit too well with Lando. Obviously, Oscar has turned up as the prodigal son. This bloke can do anything. He can turn water into wine, whatever. So Oscar was parachuted in front of Lando, and I've got to say it was a good call by McLaren to do that, but is there going to be a chink in Lando's potential armour to say, do I need to walk away from McLaren and find another seat? Potentially Mercedes if Lewis goes, or if Sainz was to leave Ferrari, or whatever. If Perez doesn't get re-signed at Red Bull, any number of options are there for him. So that's my thoughts on that. Next thing, I was able to pay regard to Logan Sargent and the rest of the mid and backfield guys, because they put on some great racing. They were doing some really good scrapping there. Sonoda, Magnussen, Hulkenberg, all those guys were just scrapping for place. I mean, they were trying to get at least a 10th place to get a point, but they just delivered some really good racing. That was good to see on what is, I think, a very fast circuit. I'm starting to enjoy it more and more, disregarding the location of the circuit, at least for the sheer speed, as I said, and the encroaching walls all the time. I don't mind the Jeddah circuit for that fact. So that's it for this edition of my notebook for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. I think it will go down marred in history as a controversial race, not compared to some others that we've seen. But the FIA have really got to sharpen their pencil and get their shit together, because this is just turning into a joke. It's just It's amateur hour for what is meant to be the world's leading for series of motorsport. Just making it into a joke. It's just a circus. Yeah, so the next edition of my notebook is going to be a bit different because I won't be here at the desk, as I'll be at the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne. I'm there from Wednesday till Sunday. If you're going to be trackside, you want to catch up, drop me a line, message me, do whatever. Put up a courier pigeon, smoke signals, anything. I'll be there, happy to meet and greet any of the members. And, of course, the AGM's on the Friday night. Now, the highlight for me is next Friday I'm driving to Sydney to go to the airport to collect this bloke, Tony Dunn. He's flying in all the way from Ireland. It's his first trip to a GP and to Australia, so I'm certainly going to turn on a good show for him. And as I said, he'll be at the AGM to meet and greet whoever he wants, and he's certainly looking forward to coming to that event. So a reminder that AGM is on Friday night from about 6:30, 7 o'clock at the Royal Mail Exchange Hotel in Melbourne. It's not far from Southern Cross Station, just a short walk if you want to come along. Everyone's invited. There is no guest list. Just turn up and introduce yourself to some other guests and put a name to a face in the group. So that'll be good, and I'll be doing the Aussie edition of this DURKO's Notebook trackside with Tony Dunn from Melbourne in a couple of weeks' time. Until then, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.